September 8th, 2009 began like any other late summer morning on the campus of Yale University, a place built on centuries of prestige, tradition, and the quiet confidence that comes with believing you are safe inside its walls. Students hurried between classes, researchers unlocked laboratories, and the rhythms of academic life moved forward without hesitation. Among them was Annie Liu, a 24-year-old doctoral candidate in pharmacology whose life seemed to be unfolding exactly as it should. Brilliant, disciplined, and deeply respected by her peers, Annie was not only on the brink of scientific achievement, but also standing at the threshold of a personal milestone. In just 5 days, she was supposed to walk down the aisle and marry the man she loved. Her wedding dress was ready. Invitations had been sent. A future that looked stable, meaningful, and full was already taking shape. That morning, at approximately 10 a.m., Annie entered the high-security research building at 10 Amistad Street, a laboratory complex designed to protect both sensitive experiments and the people who worked inside. Surveillance cameras recorded her walking in. They never recorded her leaving. When Annie failed to return home that evening, concern began to spread quickly. At first, those closest to her considered the explanations people often reach for when faced with uncertainty. Perhaps she was overwhelmed by the pressure of finishing her work while planning a wedding. Perhaps she needed space. Some even suggested the familiar cliché of cold feet, the idea that a bride-to-be might suddenly panic and disappear before her wedding day. But anyone who truly knew Annie dismissed those theories almost immediately. She was meticulous, responsible, and deeply attached to her family and fiancé. She did not vanish without explanation. As the hours stretched into a night without contact, worry hardened into fear. Yale University police were notified, followed swiftly by local and state authorities. The disappearance of a young researcher on one of the most closely monitored campuses in the United States triggered an intense and highly public search. In the days that followed, the investigation expanded rapidly. Posters with Annie's face appeared across New Haven. Media outlets descended on the campus, broadcasting images of candlelight vigils and anxious students. Police combed through dormitories, offices, and nearby neighborhoods. They reviewed hours of surveillance footage, traced keycard access logs, and interviewed dozens of people who had crossed Annie's path. The fact that she had last been seen entering a secured research building narrowed the scope of the search, but also deepened the mystery. That building was supposed to be a controlled environment. Access was limited. Movement was tracked. If Annie had disappeared inside, then the answer was not somewhere in the city streets, but within the walls themselves. As the investigation continued, a grim realization took hold. This was not a case of a missing person who might still be found alive. On September 13th, 2009, 5 days after Annie vanished, and on the very day she was meant to be married, police made a discovery that confirmed everyone's worst fears. In the basement of the Amistad Street laboratory building, hidden within a wall cavity behind cable conduits and utility infrastructure, officers found Annie Lee's body. She had been concealed in a narrow mechanical space, deliberately placed where she was unlikely to be found during routine searches. The location of her remains told a chilling story. Whoever was responsible knew the building intimately. This was not the work of an outsider who wandered in by chance. It was the act of someone who belonged there. Attention quickly turned to the people who worked alongside Annie every day. Among them was Raymond Clark III, a laboratory technician assigned to the same research facility. Clark was known among colleagues as rigid, controlling, and obsessively focused on cleanliness and protocol. While such traits might seem unremarkable in a laboratory environment, investigators began to see them in a more troubling light as evidence accumulated. One detail, in particular, stood out. Beneath Annie's body, police recovered a green ink pen. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, almost mundane. But further examination revealed that the pen matched exactly the type Clark used to sign laboratory logbooks and records. It was a small object, yet in the context of a sealed building and a hidden crime scene, it became a powerful link between the victim and a specific individual. As detectives dug deeper, more evidence surfaced. Bloodstained socks were discovered hidden above ceiling tiles, an area accessible only to someone familiar with the building's layout. Clark himself bore scratches on his body, which he claimed were caused by a cat. Investigators were not convinced. The injuries were consistent with defensive wounds, suggesting a struggle. Faced with mounting physical evidence, inconsistencies in his statements, and the growing weight of forensic analysis, the case against Raymond Clark III tightened. On September 17, 2009, he was arrested and charged in connection with Annie Lee's death. The details that emerged during the legal proceedings painted a devastating picture. Annie had been attacked inside the laboratory where she worked, a place she trusted and navigated daily. The exact sequence of events was reconstructed through forensic findings and Clark's eventual admissions. In March 2011, he pleaded guilty to charges of murder and attempted sexual assault. The plea spared Annie's family a prolonged trial, but did little to ease their pain. Clark was sentenced to 44 years in prison, a punishment that reflected the severity of the crime, but could never truly account for the life that had been taken or the future that had been erased. Annie Lou was laid to rest on the day she was meant to be married. Instead of a wedding ceremony filled with celebration and hope, there was a funeral marked by grief, disbelief, and unanswered questions. Her death sent shockwaves through the academic community and far beyond. Yale University, an institution synonymous with excellence and security, was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that even the most controlled environments can harbor violence. Students and staff struggled to reconcile the idea that a place dedicated to knowledge and progress could also become the setting for such profound betrayal. In the aftermath, discussions about campus safety intensified across the United States. Universities reviewed their security protocols, reevaluated access controls, and reconsidered how well they truly knew the people working within their facilities. Yet for all the policy changes and institutional reflections, the core lesson of Annie Lee's story remained painfully simple. Safety is often an illusion built on routine and trust. We assume that danger exists elsewhere, in dark alleys or unfamiliar places, not in laboratories, offices, or classrooms. Annie's murder shattered that assumption. What makes the case especially haunting is not only the brutality of the act, but the context in which it occurred. Annie was not reckless. She was not isolated in a risky environment. She was following her daily routine, doing the work she loved, surrounded by people who were supposed to share her goals and respect her presence. The man who killed her was not a stranger lurking at the edge of her life. He was part of her professional world, someone who moved through the same corridors and operated under the same institutional trust. More than a decade later, Annie Lee's name continues to resonate as a symbol of lost potential and broken trust. She is remembered not just as a victim, but as a scientist, a daughter, a fiancée, and a young woman whose future was stolen at the moment it should have been beginning. Her story endures because it forces us to confront uncomfortable realities about power, proximity, and the limits of security. It reminds us that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it wears the face of normalcy, hides behind routine, and waits patiently in places we least expect. In the end, the murder of Annie Lou was not just a crime committed by one individual. It was a rupture in the collective sense of safety that institutions like Yale represent. It exposed how fragile our assumptions can be and how quickly a life filled with promise can be extinguished. Annie entered that laboratory on a September morning, believing she was protected by locked doors, cameras, and shared professional norms. She never left, and in that absence, the world was left with a haunting truth. There is no space so secure, no future so carefully planned, that it cannot be undone by a single act of violence.